The phone on the hotel desk vibrated twice at 4:17 a.m., a thin insect buzz in a room that smelled like new carpet and burnt coffee. I was the only one awake on the 31st floor, or it felt that way. From the window I could see the dark river shouldering the city, the bridges like flat piano keys. In 4 hours I was supposed to stand under a confetti cannon smile, shake hands I'd already shaken 100 times, and let people with earpieces tell me where to look. I'd practiced the smile in the mirror 3 times, which is 2 times too many for any honest person. The phone buzzed again. A message from our CFO, Alana. We're ready. There was a button in my email, a benign blue rectangle that simply said, confirm. I knew that if I didn't tap it, a set of clocks would not start. A bell would not ring, and the kind of money that moves like weather would drift elsewhere. I also knew I had a folded note in my pocket, the paper softened by being opened and closed over the years, with a line Lily once wrote, "Leave yourself one honest way out." I stood there, barefoot, counting my breaths, the hum of the mini-fridge a small animal at my back, and wondered what it meant to confirm a life. I grew up in a weather-beaten corner of northern Ohio, where the lake's moods decided our weekends. My mother, Carol, was a night shift nurse who ended every 12 hours with a quiet, "Hey kid," said like a password to normalcy. My dad left when I was 9. We kept a box of his tools under the sink, a ghostly toolbox that made every leak a seance. The radio station that came in most clearly at our house was from Detroit, and I'd fall asleep to play-by-play murmurs and bad late-night ads, the kind with too much reverb, reminding you there was a whole other world buzzing after midnight. The basement smelled like laundry detergent and old cardboard. I learned early that the world runs on cardboard. It hides in plain sight. It gives shape to everything. It gets ignored until it's not there. At 13, I found a cracked beige tower PC sitting next to a dumpster behind a strip mall. I took it home on my bike, the metal basket rattling, chain singing, breath out of rhythm. The tower didn't boot, so I opened it with one of my dad's screwdrivers, half expecting to find mice living in its ribs. Dust had layered itself like a quiet snowfall across the motherboard. I brushed it with a paintbrush my mom used for craft nights. When it finally lit up, green LED, a soft whir that felt like the room had exhaled, I said, "Hey, buddy," which is the exact same thing my mother said when she walked in after a long shift. I didn't program anything then. I just clicked, wandered, broke, rebooted, fixed, repeated, like a kid at the edge of a pond figuring out which stones sink. There's a snapshot in my head from sophomore year. Me at a diner off Route 2, flipping pancakes and pretending the grill was a console only I knew the cheat codes for. The owner, Mr. Levin, taught me to move my wrists instead of my whole arms. "Efficiency," he'd say, tapping the chrome with his tongs. "A good wrist saves you a bad back." I watched the line cooks dance. Slide, flip, plate, wipe, bell. A system. A loop. One night we ran out of fryer oil and had to make do for 2 hours, and our regulars didn't yell. They ate their imperfect fries and tipped. Later, in the world I would choose, I learned that this is a kind of secret of life. People will forgive a lot if you look them in the eye and try. College was community college at first because money was what it was. I met a guy named Daniel Ortiz in the computer lab, which sounded too grand a name for 12 humming towers and a vending machine that only took exact change. Danny had the posture of someone who already owed himself an apology. He could write code like he was sketching, a series of lines with air between them, confident, slightly messy. I was careful where he was fast. We became a 2-man pendulum. When the lab closed at 11, we'd sit in Danny's Toyota and
Talk about the projects people pretend are small until they become too big to admit they started as a bet. Once he said, "There's money hiding in the boring corners." He was right. So we went looking. Our first thing was a dispatch app for towing companies. Not glamorous, I know, but the office of a tow yard is a cathedral of chaos. Radios crackling, clipboards, someone sandwiched bleeding mayo into a saucer. An owner named Jacob Fry let us sit in the corner, sipping coffee that could strip paint to watch. "Build me something that doesn't break when Jay spills Coke on it," Jacob said, nodding at his nephew. We built the app in 3 long weekends. It allowed dispatchers to drag little car icons into a queue and send text updates to drivers. That summer, we sold it to 3 other yards. That fall, we had 19 customers and a spreadsheet that made me feel both tall and in over my head.
Pensive Billionaire. I met Lily Nguyen on a windy Tuesday in a library with heavy tables. She leaned over a copy of a novel with a broken spine. Pencil in hand, hair clipped back by a plastic barrette that had one tooth missing. "You're breathing like you lost something," she said, without looking up. "I did," I said, my sense of irony. She smiled, but stayed with her page. We were not a lightning strike. We were a pilot light. She asked smart questions about what I spent my time doing and kept offering me the one thing ambition can't manufacture: perspective. When I spun out about bugs and churn and why the world didn't understand, she'd say, "Can you make one person's Tuesday better?" I started measuring progress in Tuesdays. By the time we had 47 tow yards, Danny wanted to build hardware. "Tiny sensors on pallets," he said, "will know where everything is." We called our thing Kestrel because I liked that a small bird could hang in the wind like it had made a truce with physics. We found a supplier on the other side of the world who shipped us prototype boards and plastic trays that smelled faintly like vanilla and chlorine. We burned through our cash in 8 months. The sensors worked sometimes, which is to say they failed in ways so creative I began to admire their personality. One client called them polite little liars. In a meeting where the fluorescent lights blinked with the rhythm of a nervous tick, a warehouse supervisor named Jill held up 3 dead sensors and said, "Guys, I need the opposite of this." I nodded and wrote "opposite" in my notebook, as if writing it would make it happen. We pivoted, or more honestly, we retreated from hardware like someone backing slowly away from a wild dog that you hoped just wanted your sandwich. The lesson wasn't noble, it was simple bookkeeping. Our returns column had too many numbers in it. But we kept the name Kestrel because admitting failure is lighter when you're still carrying something familiar. We decided to live where software meets people with forklifts. The first thing we shipped after that was a dashboard that predicted when a truck would actually arrive at a dock, not when someone typed it in, when it would roll up. Trucks, it turns out, are shy. They slip, stall, turn around. If you ask people how long a thing takes, they will guess to make you like them. If you ask a system, it will shrug but be consistent. Our predictions landed within 9 minutes on average, and in logistics, 9 minutes is the difference between 3 dock workers standing around and 3 dock workers making rent. I learned a fact that week and wrote it on my wall. A huge share of global trade, people say around 90%, still moves by sea, and all that swaying steel has to be stitched to land with patience and math.
Pensive Billionaire. Public attention arrived the way attention always does when you're not dressed, suddenly, with flash. A reporter named Nora Ellis from a business magazine asked to ride along at one of our clients. She wore boots sensible enough to walk a warehouse and still made them look like a choice. "What does your software do in 1 sentence?" she asked. "It stops people from wasting their breath," I said. She wrote something nicer than that. The photo shoot happened in a freezer aisle where my eyes watered, and the photographer said, "Look like you just solved something you've been stuck on for months." I said, "That's not an expression." He laughed and clicked anyway. The piece mentioned a tiny thing I'd said offhand, that the first barcode scanned in a store was on a pack of gum in the 70s, and friends texted like I'd been caught doing trivia at a bar. Factoids hide in my brain like coins in couch cushions. Sometimes they fall out and make me sound prepared. Mostly they just jingle. Sophia Bennett joined us to run communications. When we met, she made a joke about my wardrobe and then apologized for making a joke about my wardrobe, which made me like her. She had a way of telling stories that made timelines feel merciful. She also had a laugh that could start a room. We were all working too much. A therapist later told me that when you push a boulder up a hill with friends, you will either become a village or a demolition crew. We were a village, mostly. On Friday nights, we'd have a ritual called the One Good Thing, which was exactly what it sounds like. Jacob, now head of operations, would say, "My dog learned to wait for the leash." Or Danny would say, "My code compiled on the first try," which he always said dryly because code never compiles on the first try, and we'd count that as two good things. I learned that if you plan your joy, it becomes practice. The second real crisis was the day the cloud region we relied on had a bad hour. Not down exactly, just bored. Our alerting lit up like a slot machine. Clients called. "We're seeing delays." It felt like being the bass player, and suddenly your strings turned to noodles. I drove to the office because I needed the illusion of being near wires. The hum of the racks steadied me. We moved traffic to another region, but the cutover had a heartbeat of its own and missed a beat. Alana stood in the doorway eating half a bagel as if to prove survival's banality. "We need to architect for boredom," she said, "not disaster." We moved to multi-region failover the next month, which cost more and saved us in ways we couldn't show on a slide. I learned another fact and wrote it on my wall. 4 nines of availability, 99.99%, isn't romance, it's budgeting. Funding became easier because people trust momentum more than plans. We were offered money by people who had ignored us in years prior. I didn't gloat. I printed the old rejection emails and put them in a folder labeled Weather. I liked reading them on bad days because they reminded me that we hadn't tricked anyone into believing. We just kept going until the room stopped moving. At some point, my face appeared on a stage next to 2 men in expensive sneakers. They said we were changing supply chains, and I nodded the way you nod when you're listening for thunder. A question came from the audience. "What's your moat?" I could have said anything. I said, "We answer the phone." The moderator paused, smiled, and the room laughed the kind of laugh that sounds like relief. Later, Sophia said, "You can't build a moat out of being decent forever." She was right. We added features that looked like choreography in a room full of pallets, a way to predict when workers would be underutilized, a heat map of battery life on handheld scanners, an automatic alert if a door was propped open too long because thieves aren't creative so much as patient. Lily and I drifted because the road got longer. It's not a tragedy, and it's not a footnote. It's just a choice repeated until it becomes a life. We met one night on a bench and watched a train slide past. The windows small, each one an unknowable room. "You're building your Tuesday for too many people," she said gently. I wanted to beg forgiveness for something I couldn't name. Instead, I said, "Do you remember when I tried to fix that old computer with a paintbrush?" She laughed. "You cleaned dust like it had feelings." We hugged the way you hug when the present is stable and the future is already in the room checking its watch. She squeezed my hand and said, "Leave yourself one honest way out." I put the note in my pocket and later copied it onto better paper. The edges wore soft. We grew. We made a deal with a chain of regional grocers that required me to learn the phrase cross-dock well enough to say it casually at parties. We started scanning temperature logs automatically because lettuce has a memory and an attitude. We built small marvels, a way to shave one network round trip off a TLS handshake on shaky connections, which multiplied, saved actual human hours, and an integration that turned a blink, the pause a scanner takes after a beep, into enough time to show a human the one thing they needed to see and not the 17 they didn't. A developer named Priya taught me that attention is the scarcest resource in a warehouse. You get it in 1-second slices. Don't waste them. There was a year the price to move a 40-foot container across the Pacific jumped more than tenfold, and people started saying supply chain, the way you'd say the name of an old friend who got sick. I took calls where owners whispered like they were in church, "If this shipment misses the window, I'm done." I began to recognize the faces of ports from security cameras, the cranes like skeletal antlers, the water a slick mirror for impatience, the tiny human gestures that hold the world together, someone waving someone else in, a nod, a hand on a shoulder. Technology looked like code, but it felt like asking better questions of places that were already doing their best. Victor appeared again, now with softer edges. He asked to invest at a later stage with terms that were not a trap. Over coffee, he said he'd misread us. "Sometimes stubborn is just honest," he said. I said, "Sometimes sharp is just tired." We smiled. He came in with a check that helped us close a round that made new faces join the table and old ones relax their shoulders a degree. I learned to enjoy board meetings only on the drive home. During them, I listened to words like expansion and adjacency and imagined the smell of diesel and cardboard, the feel of a handheld scanner's weight. On break, I'd text Lily a photo of a room I was in, the fake plants, the identical chairs, and she'd send back a cartoon of a bird with a briefcase. People like to ask about the moment you know you're going to be big. I didn't have one moment. I had 100 small ones that felt like learning to stand on a boat without reaching for the rail. There was a Tuesday afternoon, light like a clean window, when a supervisor named Aaron called and said, unprompted, "I got home earlier." Not, "Your software saved us money," or "Your team is great," though she had said those before, just, "I got home earlier." That sentence weighed more than any KPI. When I told the team, the room made a sound I wish I could bottle. If I ever design an office, I'll leave a shelf for jars of sounds that keep us going. As the company became something outside of my skin, I found myself auditioning for the role of its founder. It's a weird feeling to be asked to impersonate yourself. I grew a beard because my face looked less like a kid's when I was on CNBC at 7 in the morning. My mother said the beard aged me in a good way, which is a phrase only mothers can use without sounding like an insult. She watched my TV appearances with the volume low so she could pretend I was in the room talking to her. "You're too fast," she'd say. Also, "sit up." I thought about a time when she took my temperature with the back of her hand and then took her own to be fair.
Pensive billionaire. We turned down an acquisition that would have ended our story in a way that looks clean in press releases. I imagine the house I'd buy, the disappearing of every bill, the quiet that money sometimes buys and sometimes only rents. Alana and I went for a walk instead. "If we sell," she said, "our people will land well. If we stay, we're promising to become better ancestors." The word ancestor did something to me. I thought of my mother on a night shift, the way she'd adjust a patient's blanket like she was tucking in the idea of them. I thought of Danny's wrists moving efficiently at a keyboard, of Priya's notes on seconds. I thought of shade cloth over lettuce. We chose to keep going. We chose to believe we could be more useful alive. Then there was the morning in the hotel room with the blue confirm button, my feet cold on a carpet that was new to me. I made coffee with a paper pod, and the machine coughed like it had regrets. I unfolded Lily's note. "Leave yourself one honest way out." I realized she didn't mean run. She meant don't become the kind of person who can only go forward because he sealed all exits to avoid the temptation to be human. I pressed confirm. It felt less like a door locking and more like a hallway lighting up. The bell, when it rang, did not sound like victory. It sounded like a bell. People clapped. Confetti did what confetti does, got into my collar and sleeves, and stayed there for days like glittery guilt. Someone put a microphone in my hand, and I said words I meant and words I didn't. My name trended for 9 minutes. I became, on paper, the kind of person whose wealth gets an adjective, billionaire. The first time I saw the word next to my face, I laughed alone in an elevator, and then stopped because the laugh sounded like someone else's. Money enlarged my choices and shrank my excuses. It also made me a mirror people used for their own faces. A cousin I hadn't seen in years wrote to me with a business idea that lived entirely in the air. A man on a plane asked me which watch to buy, and then didn't take my answer seriously because I wasn't wearing one. A charity tried to put my name on a wall, and I asked them to use a noun instead. They chose window. I liked that. We set up a foundation so we could make slightly less dumb decisions with the money than I would alone. We funded a program that retrained warehouse workers to be network technicians, because if you trust someone with a forklift, you can trust them with a switch. The graduation ceremonies were in gymnasiums that smelled like dust and pride. I shook hands and remembered Mr. Levin's wrist advice. Efficiency is love in a long job. I went back to that first tow yard where Jacob used to yell over the radio and found Jay, no longer the coke spiller, running the place with a crisp patience. He handed me a mug with our old logo on it, the Kestrel drawn by me in a free app a lifetime ago. "You still sure about birds?" he asked, smiling. "They hang in the wind," I said. "They decide." We walked the yard, the sun on metal, the slow ballet of trucks. I tried not to narrate it in my head and failed. Narration is a habit you learn when you think your life might interest strangers. It's a weak habit unless you remember the first audience is you. I also saw Lily again because life likes loops. We ran into each other at a farmer's market, the kind with $10 honey and toddlers eating strawberries with their whole faces. She was with a friend who introduced herself as Eve and said, "We've heard of you," in a tone that didn't need me to respond. Lily asked if I still carried the note. I said, sometimes in my wallet, sometimes in my head. We bought coffee and stood near a stand that sold mushrooms that looked like Carl. She told me about her work, which was teaching people to build small things that made their neighborhoods function. "It's logistics with more light," I said. She rolled her eyes. "You never learn to stop finding metaphors," she said, affectionate and exasperated in the same teaspoon. We hugged and didn't make a plan. It felt like respect. There were other women whose names I say with gratitude. Sophia, who took my runaway sentences and put them in shoes. Alana, who negotiated me out of traps I was too proud to admit were traps. Nora, who wrote about us without turning us into a parable. A person named Kira, who ran HR, a title that never tells you it means feel their weather and help them carry an umbrella. One of the best product ideas we shipped came from a woman on the night shift in Kansas City, who called herself T on the radio, and who told us, "If your thing could just tell me when to pee, I'd love you forever." We laughed, built a break planner based on load forecasts, and people used it. Add bathroom logistics to the list of phrases that sound like a joke until you see what relief looks like on a human face.
I began to sleep again, some nights. The kind of sleep that makes your morning feel like an apology for the days you wore yourself too thin. On those mornings, I made oatmeal slowly, stirring like I had time, which is to say, stirring like a wealthy man. I learned what I already knew, which is that wealth mostly buys you the conditions for rituals. The oatmeal smelled faintly like almonds. The kettle hissed. The phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. The kettle quieted. I sat on the floor because chairs felt too formal. I thought of the lake, the bridges like keys, the note in my pocket. I thought of a warehouse humming like a content animal, scanners chirping, doors closing softly. We built something that held. We built something that could be turned off and would remember how to turn back on. You might expect an ending here, a neat bow shaped like a bell or a headline. The truth is more human and less cinematic. After the confetti and the charts and the photo of me touching a screen I couldn't actually control, I took a walk across a bridge and waved at nobody. The wind pressed my shirt to my chest. I thought about the one honest way out I'd promised myself. It wasn't an exit door. It was a posture. It meant being able to say no to the lie that the only direction is forward. It meant telling a young engineer who wanted the rocket ship that sometimes a bus that shows up on time is more beautiful. It meant answering the phone when Victor called and not holding a grudge like it was a family heirloom. It meant sending my mother a video of the bell and making sure her sound was on. So when people ask what it's like to build a thing people use and then become the kind of rich that has a number written with too many commas, I don't talk about jets or watches because they bore me. I tell them about a Tuesday. There's a woman named Erin who says she gets home earlier. There's a manager in Indiana who buys a better chair. There's Jay who stopped spilling and started running. There's a kid in Dr. Park's class who will learn from our polite little LiDAR sensors without paying the tuition we did. There's me, standing barefoot in a hotel, deciding to confirm a life, holding a note that calls me to be a person instead of a headline. A few weeks after the bell, I visited a port alone. I stood where the concrete meets the water. The crane's quiet. A gull scolding me for taking its wind. The air smelled like salt and rubber. A ship leaned against the dock, massive and patient, its containers stacked like neat thoughts. A worker in a hard hat walked by, lifted 2 fingers off his coffee cup. A hello that didn't need a shared language. I thought about the fact that most of the world's stuff had ridden here and would ride away again, and that our little slice of code had asked a very old system a very simple question. When? Maybe that's all I've been doing since I found that dusty tower PC. Asking when and where and who needs to know, which are really questions about care. The gold grew bored of me and rode the wind elsewhere. I breathed until my ribs felt like a door opening. I put the note back in my wallet, sat on a bollard warm from the sun, and let my phone buzz without hurry. There are people waiting. There's a hallway lit up. There's time for one good thing today. And then another. And then sleep.